I'm sure it doesn't shock everyone that I'm a big fan of Pokemon, especially considering I made a video about it before. Well, this time I want to talk about something a lot of Pokemon players tend to argue about. Pokemon don't look like Pokemon anymore, or Gen 1 was the best generation. Or my personal favorite, that Pokemon look too furry or are considered furry bait, quote unquote. Hello, it's your abnormal artist Kiyoshi Arts. So this is a topic I've been wanting to talk about since it's always seemed to be a heated argument within the Pokemon community. This topic about how new Pokemon designs don't feel or look like Pokemon anymore, and how older designs tend to do it better. If you're big on Pokemon, you probably have seen this argument plenty of times before, especially with the reveal of each new generation and starter. And with that said, if you like this kind of video, make sure to like and subscribe to my channel. It helps me know what kind of videos you like, and it also helps me stay encouraging to making new videos. Now with that said, and with me promoting myself, let's get on to the design aspects of Pokemon. It's important that before I talk about Pokemon design, I should talk about what makes Pokemon, well, a Pokemon. Almost all Pokemon are either based on animals, objects, mythical creatures, or concepts, sometimes even being a combination of said concepts. For example, let's talk about one of my most favorite Pokemon of Generation 8, Appleton. Appleton from the appearance is based off of an apple pie, while also being inspired by a dragon. In this example, we have an object, which is the apple pie, and a mythical creature, which is the dragon. Next, something I want to cover quickly is just colors. Colors play a big part in helping people identify what type of Pokemon is. For example, when it comes to grass type, a majority of the Pokemon will have green on them to help them represent that said type. However, that's not always the case, as a example of this would be Gulpin. Gulpin is green, however, instead of being grass type, it is pure poison type. Each generation comes with a new set of Pokemon, some better, some worse than others. However, something that these generations tend to do quite well, especially with the newer generation, is the unity with each Pokemon. Let me use my personal favorite generation of all time, Generation 7, as an example of unity. Generation 7 is also known as Aloha, which is also inspired by the islands of Hawaii. Hawaii itself is a very tropical place, and the Pokemon that represents the island does it justice. Almost all of the Pokemon found in Generation 7 represents different aspects of Hawaii, with Sandygast and Palossand representing common sandcastles, Wimpod and Golisopod both being inspired by isopods, and even Comfey, while simply being based off of a lei, which is a flower necklace. However, due to these Pokemon solely being based on one environment, they don't tend to mix well with other generations, making them unable to look unified. I believe a reason why a lot of Pokemon fans tend to dislike a majority of the newer generation is due to them being seen as a standalone region and not something that was built upon by the previous generation. Generation 1 through 4 are all different generations, but their core inspiration lies in Japan. These Pokemon blend together better than newer generations due to them being inspired by the same or similar things, even building upon one another by adding new evolutions. They also look more unified due to the system they were released on. Back then, Pokemon had a more limited palette and design, so they couldn't be too complicated, simply because they weren't allowed to with the technology they had at that time. They were also all 2D sprites compared to today, which we have 3D sprites. Something that Pokemon fans tend to call out was how Game Freak is apparently running out of ideas, and how Pokemon don't even look like Pokemon anymore, and as my personal favorite, as I stated before, Pokemon are looking too furry or are considered furry bait. Well, one thing I want to cover is how some people believe that because Game Freak is running out of ideas, things are starting to look more plain or dull. But in all honesty, I feel like Pokemon designs are actually getting more creative with each new generation. For example, Pokemon isn't new to mimic like Pokemon, since we have Voltorb and Amoonguss, which both represent Pokeball. But something that is new, however, is a Pokemon mimicking another Pokemon, which is Mimikyu. Mimikyu is the embodiment of this gimmick, and is honestly one of the most popular Pokemon because of it. Although there are Pokemon that are made for the sole purpose of filling out the Pokedex, examples such as Squawkabilly from Gen 9 or Squirrelvit from Gen 8. The complaint I hear the most often, however, is how newer generation Pokemon don't look or feel like Pokemon anymore. I can understand this view as each new generation has made Pokemon design way more complex and way more niche instead of simply just being one thing. There's Tauros from Generation 1 that's clearly just a bowl, and Cloyster, which is simply just a clam with a face. But now we have a Fire Knight with the Shark Cadet line and a literal car engine as a Pokemon. However, the newer Pokemon design are more experimental compared to the previous designs. Pokemon simply wouldn't be Pokemon if each new generation was essentially just a copy and paste with only a region changing. At some point, you gotta try something new, and it feels like Game Freak has been doing just that with the newer generations. Sure, some Pokemon may look like they were pulled out of a completely different game or look completely out of place, but hey, that's the fun of Pokemon design. And what it means to look or be a Pokemon is also always changing. It isn't tied to just a specific thing like it used to be before. So, Antro Pokemon. Regards Pokemon that are bipedal and often fall into their niche rather their animal-like design. So Pokemon like Lopunny and the newly added Meowscarada falls into this category, but Blastoise wouldn't. This argument usually refers to starter Pokemon as well. I know a fair amount of Pokemon dislike this character design as it's used very often, especially with the Pokemon starters as I stated before. People believe they look less Pokemon and start to feel more human-like, which I do understand since more of the final evolutions, especially the starters, have become more bipedal, usually with only one of them becoming four-legged. However, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that Pokemon have become more bipedal, especially if it explains the Pokemon better than if they were to be quadrupedal. For example, Delphox is a bipedal fox that has witch traits to them. Turning Delphox four-legged will remove their ability to use a wand, and the robe aspect will either have to be changed heavily in order to give clothing to a four-legged creature or entirely removed, further struggling to show that Delphox is both a fox and a wish. Now, I want to hear some of your response. Here I asked people how they felt about the Pokemon design, both the new and older generation. This one comes from Riku. Pokemon used to have a lot simpler designs in older generation, and part of the reason newer Pokemon aren't like as much is that they are too, quote, out there, quote, and stylized, and because of that, classic Pokemon style is much more cuter and simpler. Don't mean it's worse, but I prefer older generation. I can honestly understand this reasoning. Pokemon design has become more complicated compared to the previous generation. Simply looking at the design of the box legendary Pokemon will just prove this. This one comes from Egan Media. I think the newer Pokemon design are good. I don't think Pokemon has ever lessened their design in Pokemon ever. Sure, some are lazier than others, but there's still a small amount in comparison to the large amount that got it right. And I agree with it. As much of a soft spot I have for older Pokemon, newer Pokemon design are way more expressive compared to them. This one comes from Scary Moist. I think that Pokemon design has always been generally good, but have gone from being overly simple in the early games to being a tad bit complicated in the recent games. I think that the designs peak around Generation 3 and 6, and honestly, that's a fair statement. Older generations tend to be a bit bland, while the new generations tend to be a bit overwhelming. Example being the Box Luncher series, as I mentioned before. This one comes from Blue Spook. I feel like all gen have a consistent amount of bad, okay, and amazing Pokemon, and as stated earlier, I very much agree with this. Some Pokemon design are simply more liked than others. Pokemon like Tickaton are iconic for their generation, but other Pokemon like Rellroller from the same generation have little to no remembrance. When it really comes down to it, however, what's really important is a person's own perspective, whether they like a Pokemon design or not. Sure, there may be opinions that differ, and there may be factors that theoretically make a Pokemon design better, but hey, everybody has their own opinion. Some people just like the more monster-like design, while others prefer a more cute one. It all just comes down to personal bias in the end. Hello, and welcome to the end card. I know this video took me 3 months to make, and even though it doesn't look like I put 3 months in it, I did. On and off, because well, life is complicated like that, and unfortunately, I can't do it all simply in a month. But yeah, I'm happy I got this video out, and I hope that you like the video as well. It's also my birthday month, so I'm really excited, and I hope that we can get to 250 subscribers by the end of the month. If not, that's alright. I don't mind. But yeah, with that said, and with me talking about myself, I'll be ending out the video. See you in the next one, whenever that one comes out.